I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. The federal party leaders continue to campaign full speed ahead as the election enters its last week. Both Conservative leader Erin O'Toole and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh were in Ontario today. Mr. Singh was in the province's northwest, while Mr. O'Toole stayed close to his adopted headquarters in Ottawa. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau made an announcement scheduled during his visit to Vancouver today, and Canadians head to the polls on September 20th. Police in London, Ontario say a 25-year-old man has been charged for allegedly throwing gravel at Liberal leader Justin Trudeau during a campaign stop. Police say Shane Marshall of St. Thomas faces one count of assault with a weapon. Earlier this week, the People's Party of Canada said it removed a man named Shane Marshall from the post of Elgin, Middlesex, London Riding Association president. 145 Afghans who are at risk of retribution by the Taliban will soon be on their way to Canada. A spokesman for Immigration Minister Marco Mendicino says the group of refugees have fled to Pakistan and will be on their way to Canada within days or weeks. Their number includes individuals associated with the Malala Foundation, students at the Marifat Girls' School, and fixers who helped Canadian journalists covering the mission. An organization calling itself Canadian Frontline Nurses posted notices of silent vigils expected to take place in all 10 provinces. Demonstrators are expected to target hospitals across the country with protests against COVID-19 health restrictions and the prospect of proof of vaccination systems. Prospective locations include the Winnipeg Health Sciences Centre, Toronto General Hospital, and the Queen Elizabeth II Health Sciences Centre in Halifax. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization says people who are immunocompromised should receive a third shot of a COVID-19 vaccine. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Teresa Tam says the advice applies to people 12 and older whose immune systems are compromised for a variety of reasons. This includes those being treated for a tumor or having an untreated HIV infection that has advanced. Students at two nations in Manitoba are headed back to school a year behind due to COVID-19 outbreaks during the last school year. Educators on Shamattawa First Nation, northeast of Winnipeg, made the decision to have students repeat the previous year. Chief Eric Redhead says the community was unable to use virtual learning because the internet connection there was too unreliable. Some students at Pimachikamak Cree Nation, also known as Cross Lake, will also be repeating the school year after the school was shut down due to a COVID-19 outbreak. A state-owned Chinese telecommunications firm is asking the federal court to set aside the recent decision directing it to divest its stake in a Canadian subsidiary. The Liberal government issued the direction to China Mobile International Canada, citing national security concerns. CMI Canada says the government has no grounds to believe the company would compromise security and says the move is politically motivated. Communities across the country commemorated the 20th anniversary of the September 11th terror attacks. Events were held in multiple cities to pay tribute to those who died. This while also honoring the endurance of the human spirit in the face of such horror. 24 Canadians were among the almost 3,000 people killed. 34 passenger planes and 4 military planes were diverted that day to Gander, Newfoundland and Labrador, increasing the town's population by 6,600. Amazon Canada is set to look for 15,000 warehouse and distribution workers from coast to coast this fall. The e-commerce giant currently has 25,000 Canadian employees, but it is expanding rapidly due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting online shopping boom. Amazon now has 46 warehouse and delivery facilities in Canada, compared with 30 in mid-2020. But it notes the number is expected to grow, with new announcements coming later this year. Two movie theater titans are taking a dispute to court. Toronto-based Cineplex is seeking to recoup $2.18 billion in damages from Cineworld Group plc. This after the UK theater giant walked away from the December 2019 takeover deal amid strict economic lockdown measures in 2020. They were alleging material adverse effects and breaches by Cineplex. Cineplex has called Cineworld's decision to terminate the deal nothing more than a case of buyer's remorse. Well, the future is bright for Canadian tennis sensation Leylah Fernandez. The 19-year-old from Laval, Quebec, lost the U.S. Open final to Britain's Emma Raducanu yesterday, but she wants to show the world her magical run was no fluke. The Canadian beat top players like Naomi Osaka, Angelique Kerber, and Aryna Sabalenka on her way to the final. When we come back from the break, we'll take a look at how the federal election is playing out in Atlantic Canada. We spoke with Dr. Tom Bateman of St. Thomas University in New Brunswick, and we discussed the top election issues in the Maritimes, along with some battleground ridings. We'll be right back. Canadians across the country go to the polls on September 20th, and Atlantic Canada will be the first region in the country to be able to cast their votes. According to a recent survey by Narrative Research, Atlantic Canadians are less likely to vote for the same party every election. The September 10th survey also shows that Atlantic Canadians are more likely to decide who to vote for based on the local candidate. It also means some ridings have become interesting political battlegrounds. Well, to tell us more about the major concerns of Atlantic Canadians this election is Dr. Tom Bateman, professor at St. Thomas University in New Brunswick. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
So let's start with this, sir. What makes the voters in Atlantic Canada unique from those in other provinces?
I would say that there is a much greater attachment to place in Atlantic Canada, a little bit less personal mobility. And so the people who are here are attached to their ridings, to their provinces, and they tend to get to know the local candidates. Politics are very local in the Maritimes. And the disposition of Maritimers is kind of conservative in character. They change, but slowly. And so Canadians elsewhere experiment with new parties all the time. Not so much in the Maritimes. With some exceptions, it remains a two-party region.
All right. And what have been the primary concerns of Atlantic Canadians during this election, Doctor?
Yeah, well, a big one is why we're having an election anyway. I don't think Marit is more convinced than anyone else is about why there's an election within 2 years of the previous one. And but the other one, I would say, is healthcare. As you know, healthcare is at or near the top of federal voters' concerns all the time. And true in the Maritimes. Demographically, it's an older population. People use the healthcare system a lot. And of course, what we're experiencing during this COVID pandemic is acute nursing shortages, long wait times, to the extent that some emergency rooms actually have shut down over weekends for lack of staff them.
And I guess one of the big questions would be, have federal parties addressed the needs of Atlantic Canadians in the campaign trail so far?
Not particularly. I would say that the Maritimers have just been consuming the national media and what the leaders are saying. I don't detect any particular tailoring national campaign announcements to Atlantic Canadians in particular. But what's interesting is that all the parties are now tacking left of center, including the Tories. And those kinds of messages have receptive ears in Atlantic Canada. This is a province that depends on government transfers to a great extent. And so the interventionist orthodoxy that now seems to be becoming even more entrenched in Canadian politics is pretty good news for Maritimers.
All right. And what are the top battleground ridings in Atlantic Canada to watch on election night, Doctor?
Yeah, it's a good question. 32 seats are up for grabs. In 2015, it was a shutout for the Liberals. The Liberals lost some seats in 2019. And by my count, I would say that there are 10 seats that are up for grabs next week. And perhaps one of the most interesting is the one in which I live, which is Fredericton, because it is represented by Jenica Atwin, who was elected in 2019 as a Green Party candidate. And then in June of this year, she switched and became a Liberal. The Liberal candidate in 2019 came in third in a close three-way. So the question is, will Jenica Atwin, now as a Liberal, get reelected? That depends on whether she can pull 2019 Green voters with her. And that's by no means obvious. So we've got a tight three-way race in Fredericton, but Miramichi is very, and St. John in New Brunswick also is very close. And a couple in Nova Scotia, one maybe in Newfoundland, are also close. So it could be an interesting evening on the 20th.
All right, sir. An interesting evening indeed. We'll definitely keep an eye out for that, sir. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
My pleasure.
All right, when we come back from the break, we take a look at a major issue in Canada, notably highlighted in this federal election. We talk about climate change and its impacts across the country and what can be done about it. An interview with Gideon Foreman of the David Suzuki Foundation when we come back after the break. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Addressing climate change has become a top priority during the election campaign as wildfires, extreme heat and drought have already hit many Canadian communities. With countries worldwide looking to reduce their impact and shifting to renewable energy sources, what will Canada do? Climate change has been a major discussion during this election, and political parties have all made various promises to address the issue. But what are some realistic steps that the next federal government can take to address climate change? And how can individual Canadians make a difference in this effort? Well, joining us now to help address some of these questions is Mr. Gideon Foreman, Climate Change and Transportation Policy Analyst at the David Suzuki Foundation. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks so much.
Now, we hear a lot about climate change, especially on the campaign trail. But what does climate change look like in Canada today compared to maybe 50 or 100 years ago?
I think a lot of what we've been seeing this past summer, these droughts, these forest fires, the heat. I mean, I think about the heat in that poor community of Lytton, British Columbia, in the BC interior, reaching temperatures of 49 degrees Celsius. So you think about it, that's halfway to boiling on the Celsius scale. I mean, that's what climate change is looking like. And so when the scientists say climate change is real, it's happening now, that's what it looks like.
All right, sir. Well, jumping to some of the issues on the campaign trail, we know affordability is a big one. So what are some realistic or reasonable steps to address rising food and energy costs in an environmentally sustainable way?
I mean, I think the good thing about the transition we need to make to move to a greener economy is that a lot of the things that we're going to have in our daily lives in that economy are actually going to be less expensive. So as we move, for example, to wind and solar power, the cost of electricity is going to come down. One of the big energy stories of the last few years is just how much electricity costs for wind and solar have dropped just dramatically in the last few years. As we move to more electric cars and electric buses, municipalities and individuals are going to save money because it's actually just cheaper to run electric vehicles. Electric cars, as you know, there's just not much to go wrong with them, so maintenance costs are very low. And same thing with electric buses. They're just very inexpensive to run. So the good news is that a lot of the things we need in this new green economy, they're the right thing to do. They're good for the climate, but they're also good for the pocketbook.
All right, sir. Well, we know a major aspect of the climate change discussion in Canada is the country's oil reserves. So what would a complete shift from Canada's dependence on fossil fuels to green energy look like?
Well, first of all, it would be a place where we're doing something for the workers in the oil and gas sector. You know, as we make that transition away from oil and gas, as the scientists say we absolutely 100% have to protect the folks who are working in the oil and gas sector and make sure that they get other jobs in the new economy. The good news is that there are lots of jobs in that new economy. We can put lots of people to work building electric buses and electric cars and putting up solar and wind power, producing fruits and vegetables and other foods that we need locally. So the good news is as we transition to that green economy, it's going to be an economy in which we create a lot of jobs as well.
All right, sir, just about 2 minutes left here, but jumping to transportation, Canada is a large country with a spread out population. So what are some ways we can better link our northern and rural people with the rest of the country while reducing emissions?
Well, one of the things that we've talked about is a national bus system. You know, this year with Greyhound pulling out of Canada, a lot of northern and remote communities are really isolated and they're not connected anymore. What we think the federal and provincial governments and territorial governments should do is have a national bus system, ideally with electric buses, so that people in these rural and northern communities would be able to get around by bus. That's a first step, we think.
All right, sir. And what are your concerns or your organization's concerns when it comes to Canada-specific issues in terms of climate change?
Well, we absolutely have to get our emissions down. I mean, we have to transition away from the fossil fuel sector. And that's not just us saying that. That's what the world scientists and economists are saying. We have to move away from that. That means a very significant reduction in emissions from oil and gas, probably on the order of 60%. But the good news is in this transition, we can also create a lot of jobs. And Canada is really well positioned for this transition. We have a huge amount of solar and wind power, for example. I mean, on the southern prairies in Alberta and Saskatchewan, we have world-class wind and solar. So as we make that transition, I think we're going to find a lot of benefits, a lot of co-benefits. Also, people's health will improve. As we're not burning fossil fuels, air quality is going to improve. And so we're going to see people healthier as well.
All right, Mr. Gideon Foreman from the David Suzuki Foundation. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today on Forum Daily.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, after the break, we will take a look at stories that happened around the world this week, from a new military alliance between the U.S., U.K., and Australia to the French president claiming that his country's military neutralized an Islamic State commander, to the European Union asking member states to do better to protect journalists and media workers, to thousands of people marching against El Salvador's government. These stories and more international news when we return from the break. We'll be right back after these messages, so stay with us, everyone. U.S. President Joe Biden has announced that the United States is forming a new Indo-Pacific security alliance with Britain and Australia. It will allow for greater sharing of defense capabilities. It's a move that could deepen tensions in U.S.-China relations. Mr. Biden says bolstering resources will help keep the peace in the region. There is no official word on whether Canada will be involved. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says his government decided to invest in U.S. nuclear-powered submarines. He says the government is ending its contract with France to build diesel-electric submarines. This is because of a changed strategic environment. U.S. President Joe Biden had earlier announced a new security alliance with Australia and Britain. It will develop an Australian nuclear-powered submarine fleet. France's president says the head of the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara has been killed. Announced in a tweet, Emmanuel Macron says the successful military operation is a major win for French forces in the region. The French military has been fighting Islamic extremists in the Sahel region since intervening in Mali in 2013. The UN Security Council is encouraging Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan to resume talks on the issue of water availability. The issue has arisen due to the dam that the Ethiopians are building on the main tributary of the Nile River. The dam is 80% complete. Egypt and Sudan contend it threatens 150 million people downstream. Ethiopia says the $5 billion dam is essential to make sure the vast majority of its people have electricity. An Indonesian court has ruled that President Joko Widodo and 6 top officials have neglected to fulfill citizens' rights to clean air, and it has ordered them to improve the poor air quality in the capital. The Central Jakarta District Court panel voted 3-0 in favor of the group. They are made up of 32 residents of Jakarta who sued the president, 3 cabinet ministers, and the governors of Jakarta, Banten, and West Java. Tesla has sidestepped American car dealership laws by setting up shop on Native American land for the first time. This could be a model for Tesla to sell vehicles in states that require car companies to sell through dealerships. The tribe has welcomed the Tesla store that opened last week. They are calling it an environmentally conscious employer. Car dealers say consumers should buy electric vehicles from companies that follow state laws. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's top legal advisor says the International Criminal Court is being used as a pawn. Chief Presidential Legal Counsel Salvador Panelo says the court is being used by the president's political foes. This is ahead of an election. The court decided to investigate allegations of crimes against humanity during his war on drugs. According to President Duterte's spokesman, the president says, quote, he will die first before he faces any international courts. Thousands of people in El Salvador are marching against the government of President Nayib Bukele. The demonstration entered on fears that Mr. Bukele may try to re-elect himself in 2024. Protests also voiced concern about the president's concentration of power and the decision to make Bitcoin legal tender. Protesters also say Mr. Bukele has weakened the independence of the courts. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is ordering the entire peacekeeping contingent from Gabon that are serving in the Central African Republic. This follows credible reports of sexual abuse by some of its 450 members and past allegations. The United Nations has long been in the spotlight over allegations of child rape and other sexual abuses by peacekeepers, especially in Central African Republic and Congo. The EU's executive branch is asking member states to do better to protect journalists and media workers. The European Commission says 908 journalists and media workers were attacked across the 27-nation bloc in 2020. A total of 23 journalists have been killed in the EU since 1992. This with the majority of killings taking place over the past 6 years. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Facebook, Instagram's parent company, downplayed research about how the app makes some teens feel about themselves. The Journal reports that according to an internal presentation from March of last year, 32% of teen girls said when they feel bad about their bodies that Instagram made them feel worse. Another slide said teens blame Instagram for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. Instagram responded to the report by saying it is developing tools to help users combat negative feelings. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily News Week in Review. We'll see you next time. Take care, Canada.